Broken stick, unbroken hearts. The desert doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. When Caleb Monroe heard that sound cutting through the Arizona heat, a child's voice, raw and desperate, he knew his solitary life was over. What he found would haunt him forever. A 4-year-old girl standing over her dying mother with nothing but a broken stick and eyes that had already seen too much. In that moment, the war-scarred rancher who'd sworn off the world made a choice that would destroy his carefully built isolation and force him to become the man he'd stopped believing he could be. If you want to know how a man who'd lost everything found a reason to fight again, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The sun hammered down on the Arizona territory with the weight of divine judgment, turning the air itself into something thick enough to choke on. Caleb Monroe had learned to live with it the way other men lived with whiskey or God, as a constant companion that asked nothing and gave less. His ranch sat 20 miles from the nearest settlement, a collection of weathered structures that looked like they'd grown from the desert floor rather than been built upon it. The barn leaned slightly westward, perpetually surrendering to winds that never quite knocked it down. The house stood defiant but tired, its windows reflecting nothing but endless sky and scrubland that stretched to mountains so distant they might have been painted on the horizon. Caleb preferred it that way. Distance meant safety. Isolation meant control. And control meant he could finally sleep without seeing the things that used to wake him screaming. He was mending fence in the south pasture when he heard it, a sound so out of place in that vast silence that it stopped him mid-swing, the hammer frozen in his calloused hand. At first he thought it might be a coyote, or maybe one of the wild horses that sometimes wandered down from the higher elevations. But then it came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. A child's voice, crying. Caleb's jaw tightened. Children didn't wander into the deep desert, not alone, not unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. He dropped the hammer and turned slowly, scanning the landscape with eyes that had learned to read terrain the way scholars read books. The cry came again, stronger now, edged with something that made his chest constrict. Not fear. Not exactly. Defiance, maybe. A small voice refusing to be swallowed by the enormity of everything trying to consume it. He found them a quarter-mile from his property line, where the land dipped into a shallow wash that would become a raging torrent when the rains came but now offered only rocks and the skeletal remains of mesquite. The child saw him first, a little girl, maybe 4 years old, her dress torn and crusted with dust and what looked like dried blood. She stood like a soldier on guard duty, gripping a stick no bigger than a kindling branch, her small body positioned protectively over a woman who lay motionless in the dirt. "Stay back," the girl said. Her voice cracked, but the stick didn't waver. "You stay back or I'll hit you." Caleb stopped 10 feet away, raising his hands slowly. Up close, he could see the tracks in the dirt, boot prints, multiple sets, and the drag marks where the woman had been pulled and then abandoned. His stomach turned. He'd seen this before, in different forms. The war had taught him what men were capable of when they decided another person's humanity was negotiable. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw from disuse. He cleared his throat and tried again. "My name's Caleb. I have a ranch just over that rise. What's your name?" The girl's eyes, too large in her thin face, dark and liquid with unshed tears, didn't leave his. "Lily." "That's a real pretty name." He kept his hands visible, his posture open and unthreatening. "Is that your mama?" Lily's chin trembled, but she nodded once. "She won't wake up. I tried and tried, but she won't wake up." Caleb's gaze shifted to the woman. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair matted with blood and dirt. Her dress had been expensive once. He could tell by the quality of the fabric, even torn and filthy as it was. Her face was bruised, swollen on one side, and her breathing was so shallow he had to watch carefully to confirm she was still alive. "Lily, I need to help your mama," he said, taking one careful step forward. "But I can't do that from way over here. Will you let me come closer?" The stick trembled. Lily's whole body trembled, but after a long moment she lowered her weapon an inch. "You promise you won't hurt her?" "I promise." "You promise on your life?" Something in Caleb's chest cracked open, a fissure in the careful armor he'd built around himself. This child, this impossibly small and fierce child, had been failed by every adult who should have protected her. And still she stood guard. Still she demanded oaths and accountability from a world that had given her nothing but reasons not to trust. "I promise on my life," he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in years. Lily stepped aside. Caleb moved quickly then, kneeling beside the woman and checking for injuries with hands that remembered field medicine and battlefield triage. Broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, a head wound that had bled profusely but seemed to have clotted, dehydration and exposure. He'd seen men die from less, but he'd also seen them survive worse. The question was time. "How long has she been like this?" he asked, already calculating distances, water needs, the supplies he had at the ranch. "Since yesterday. We were on the wagon road going to Phoenix. The men came and—" Lily's voice broke. She pressed her lips together hard, forcing the tears back with visible effort. "They hurt her. They hurt her and they took everything and they left us." Caleb's hands stilled for just a moment. Then he forced himself to keep moving, to focus on what could be fixed rather than what should be avenged. "You stayed with her all night?" "I couldn't leave her alone." He looked at this child, this baby who should have been playing with dolls and learning letters, and saw a soldier. Saw someone who'd held the line when retreat would have been easier. Saw someone worth saving. "You did real good, Lily," he said, his voice thick. "You kept her alive. Now I'm going to get you both somewhere safe, and we're going to make her better." "Okay?" Lily nodded, but her eyes remained wary. Trust, Caleb understood, was something you earned in increments. He stripped off his shirt in the blazing heat and used it to cushion the woman's head as he lifted her. She was lighter than she should have been, all sharp edges and fragile bones. Lily followed as he started the walk back to the ranch, her small hand gripping the edge of his belt, her broken stick still clutched in the other hand like a talisman. The walk took forever. The woman, Eleanor, he learned when Lily finally spoke her mother's name, didn't wake, but her breathing stayed steady. Lily didn't speak again either, just trudged alongside him with grim determination, her small face set in lines too hard for someone so young. When they finally reached the ranch house, Caleb kicked open the door and carried Eleanor straight to his bedroom, the only room in the house with a real bed rather than a cot. He laid her down with the gentleness that surprised him, then turned to Lily. "I need to get water and bandages," he said. "Will you stay with her?" Lily climbed onto the bed without a word, taking up position beside her mother like she had done in the desert, that broken stick still in her hand. Caleb moved fast. Water from the well, clean cloth torn from the one decent shirt he owned, whiskey for disinfecting, herbs he'd learned to use from a Navajo woman who'd helped him when he'd first come to this country. His hands worked from memory, cleaning wounds, checking for breaks, doing everything he could think of to drag this woman back from whatever edge she was teetering on. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open once while he worked, unfocused and glassy with fever. "Lily," she whispered. "She's right here," Caleb said, nodding to where the little girl sat watching everything with those enormous eyes. "She's safe. You're both safe." Eleanor's gaze tried to focus on him, and for a moment something like recognition flickered there, not of him specifically, but of what he was trying to do. Then her eyes rolled back and she was gone again, lost to unconsciousness and the fever that was already building in her skin. For 3 days, Eleanor burned. Caleb kept her as cool as he could, forcing water between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow, changing the dressings on her wounds, monitoring the infection that threatened to consume her. Lily never left the bedside except when Caleb physically carried her away to eat or use the privy. Even then, she fought to get back, her small body rigid with terror that her mother would disappear if she looked away. "She won't leave without you," Caleb told her, again and again. "I promise, Lily. She won't leave without you." On the 4th day, the fever broke. Caleb had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, his head tilted back at an angle that would make his neck scream when he woke. A sound pulled him from shallow sleep. A voice, hoarse and uncertain. "Where am I?" He jerked awake to find Eleanor's eyes open and clear, looking at him with a mixture of confusion and fear. Lily, curled up at her mother's side, was still sleeping, one small hand wrapped around Eleanor's arm like an anchor. "You're safe," Caleb said quietly, not wanting to wake the child. My ranch, about 20 miles south of the Phoenix Road. Your daughter found me 4 days ago. Eleanor's hand moved shakily to touch Lily's hair. She's all right? Toughest person I've ever met. He stood slowly, giving her space to adjust. You want some water? She nodded, and he helped her sit up enough to drink without choking. Her hand shook so badly he had to hold the cup for her. When she'd had enough, she leaned back with a wince that told him the ribs were still painful. The men, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Are they still gone? Whatever they did, they left you both for dead. Lily kept you alive until I found you. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her sleeping daughter, and something in her face broke and reformed simultaneously. I couldn't protect her. You got her through it. That's what matters. You don't understand. Eleanor's voice cracked. I couldn't protect her from any of it. Not from her father dying, not from poverty, not from men who see a woman and child alone and think they're entitled to... She stopped, pressing her lips together hard. Caleb pulled the chair closer and sat down, resting his forearms on his knees. What happened out there wasn't your fault. I made bad choices, trusted the wrong people, got desperate and thought I could make it to Phoenix, thought I could find work, start over. Her laugh was bitter. Instead, I got my daughter killed. She's not dead. She could have been. She should have been. We were out there for hours before you came, and anything could have... Eleanor's breath hitched. She's 4 years old. She shouldn't have to know what men are capable of. She shouldn't have memories like that. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I was at Shiloh. Saw boys younger than me die in ways that still wake me up screaming. Came out here thinking distance might make the memories smaller. He paused. It doesn't work that way. The only thing that helps is knowing you survived it, and knowing why you choose to keep surviving. Eleanor looked at him properly for the first time, really seeing him. He was in his mid-30s, she guessed, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples, and eyes the color of winter sky. His face was weathered and scarred, a thick line across his jaw, another disappearing into his hairline. His hands, resting on his knees, were marked with old burns and healed breaks. This was a man who'd been broken and had learned to function anyway. Why did you help us? She asked. He considered the question. Because when I heard your daughter crying in the desert, I had a choice. I could pretend I didn't hear it, or I could go see what was wrong. And I'm trying real hard these days to be the kind of man who goes to see what's wrong. Even when it's none of your business? Especially then. Lily stirred between them, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw her mother awake, a sound escaped her, something between a sob and a laugh, and she launched herself at Eleanor with enough force to make the injured woman gasp. But Eleanor didn't push her away. She wrapped both arms around her daughter and held on like drowning, and Lily held back the same way. Caleb stood quietly and left them to it, closing the door behind him. The days that followed established a rhythm. Eleanor was weak but healing, able to sit up and eventually walk short distances with support. Lily shadowed Caleb relentlessly, her initial wariness transforming into determined observation. She watched him cook, watched him tend the animals, watched him mend things around the ranch. She didn't speak much, but her presence was constant. One afternoon he found her trying to carry water from the well, the bucket nearly as big as she was. He took it from her gently and carried it himself, and she followed him all the way back to the house. You don't have to work, he told her. You're not a servant here. He paused, uncertain what word to use. Guest didn't feel right, neither did visitor. You're just here. That's enough. Mama says people who don't work don't eat. Well, your mama's still healing, which is work. And you kept her alive in the desert, which is more work than most grown men could handle. So I'd say you've both earned rest. Lily considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. Finally, she nodded once and went to sit on the porch steps, her broken stick laid carefully across her lap. Caleb had meant to throw that stick away a dozen times. But every time he reached for it, something stopped him. That stick meant something to this child. It was the weapon she'd wielded when the world tried to take everything from her. Throwing it away felt like disrespecting a soldier's rifle. Eleanor recovered slowly. The bruises faded from purple to green to yellow. The ribs healed enough that she could breathe without wincing. The cut on her scalp closed and began to scar. But there were other injuries that Caleb couldn't see. The way she flinched when he moved too quickly, the nightmares that woke her gasping in the dark, the way her hands shook when Lily wandered out of sight. 2 weeks after he'd found them, Eleanor finally made it out to the porch under her own power. She sat heavily in the chair Caleb had dragged from inside, her face pale with effort but determined. Lily immediately climbed into her lap, and Eleanor wrapped her arms around her daughter with visible relief. Caleb was working on the corral gate, replacing boards that had rotted through the previous winter. He could feel Eleanor watching him, could sense the weight of unasked questions. Finally, she spoke. "How much do we owe you?" He didn't look up from the board he was fitting. "Nothing. We've been here 2 weeks. We've eaten your food, used your supplies, taken your bed, and you'll keep doing all those things until you're strong enough to decide what comes next." He straightened, meeting her eyes across the yard. "I'm not keeping a ledger, Eleanor. You don't owe me anything." "Everyone wants something." The bitterness in her voice made him pause. He set down the hammer and walked over to the porch, leaning against the rail. "The men who hurt you taught you that. But it's not true of everyone." "Isn't it?" Her laugh was hollow. "My husband wanted a wife who'd give him sons and never question his drinking. His family wanted me gone the moment he died because they didn't want to support his mistakes. The people I worked for in Santa Fe wanted someone they could pay half wages because I was desperate enough to accept it. The men on the road wanted—" She stopped, glancing at Lily, who was watching them both with those 2 old eyes. Caleb waited. When Eleanor didn't continue, he said quietly, "I want you and your daughter to be safe. That's all. When you're ready to leave, I'll take you wherever you want to go. Until then, you stay." "Why?" The question came out sharp, almost accusatory. "You don't know us. We're nothing to you. You're people who needed help. That's enough." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then she said, "You're either a saint or a fool." "Neither. Just a man who heard a child crying and couldn't walk away from it." Lily spoke up then, her voice small but clear. "He promised on his life he wouldn't hurt you, Mama. He promised." Something in Eleanor's expression shifted. She looked down at her daughter, then back at Caleb, and he saw the exact moment she decided to take a chance on trust. It was tentative, fragile as new ice, but it was there. "All right," she said. "We'll stay until I'm stronger, but then we need to figure out where to go, because we can't impose on you forever." "It's not an imposition." He picked up the hammer again, turning back to his work. "It's just people taking care of people, the way it's supposed to work." That night, Caleb gave up trying to pretend the cot in the main room was comfortable and moved his bedroll out to the barn. Eleanor protested, but he waved her off. He'd slept in worse places, and the barn was actually pleasant this time of year, cool at night, the horses providing ambient sound that helped quiet the ghosts in his head. He was settling down into his blankets when he heard the barn door creak open. Lily stood silhouetted in the moonlight, her broken stick in one hand. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head and crossed to where he lay, sitting down cross-legged beside him like they'd done this 100 times before. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Lily said, "Do you think the bad men will come back?" Caleb chose his words carefully. "I think they went somewhere else looking for easier targets. Men like that are cowards. They don't come back where they might have to face consequences." "But what if they do?" He sat up, giving her his full attention. "If they do, I'll stop them. That's a promise." "On your life?" "On my life." Lily nodded, accepting this. Then she handed him the broken stick. "You can have this, to help you fight if they come." Caleb took the stick, feeling the weight of what she was offering. This wasn't just a piece of wood. This was her symbol of defiance, her proof that she'd stood her ground when the world tried to break her, and she was trusting him with it. "I'll keep it safe," he said, "and when you want it back, you just say the word." "Okay?" She stood up, but hesitated. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you heard me crying." She was gone before he could respond, slipping back out into the night like a small ghost. Caleb sat holding that broken stick for a long time, feeling something in his chest that he'd thought the war had killed. It took him a while to recognize it. Hope. The damn thing was hope. The next morning, Eleanor was up before dawn, working despite her obvious exhaustion. Caleb found her trying to sweep the porch, moving stiffly but determined. He took the broom from her hands. "You're going to tear something open and set your healing back weeks," he said. "I need to be useful." "You need to heal." "I can do both." She reached for the broom, but he held it out of reach. They stood there in the gray pre-dawn light, locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Eleanor said, "I can't just take and give nothing back. That's not who I am." "Then tell me who you are," Caleb said. "Because I'd like to know." She stared at him, caught off guard. Then slowly she sat down on the porch step. Caleb sat beside her, the broom forgotten. "I was Eleanor Whitmore," she said. "From Boston. My father was a banker who went bankrupt during the Panic of '57 and drank himself to death before I turned 15. My mother remarried quickly. She had to. And her new husband made it clear I wasn't part of the new family arrangement. So when Thomas Hale offered marriage, I took it. I was 18 and stupid, and thought anywhere had to be better than where I was." She paused, staring out at the lightening horizon. Caleb didn't push her. Thomas was handsome and charming when he wanted to be. He was also violent when he drank, which was often. We came west because he owed people money in Boston. He died in a bar fight in Santa Fe when Lily was 2. Left us nothing but debts. Her voice was flat, reciting facts. His family paid off what he owed and told me to disappear. So I did. "You've been on your own for 2 years?" "Working whatever jobs I could find, cleaning, mending, cooking. Lily came with me everywhere because I couldn't afford to leave her anywhere safe. We were making it work, barely. Then I heard about opportunities in Phoenix, real jobs, good wages. I thought if I could just get there, we'd have a chance at something better." "You still can," Caleb said. Eleanor turned to look at him. "Can I? Or am I just fooling myself that anywhere will be different, that people will see me as anything other than what I am, a widow with a child and no prospects?" "You're a woman who survived things that would have broken most people. You're a mother who raised a daughter brave enough to stand guard with a stick against the entire desert. You're someone who kept fighting even when everything told you to give up." He met her eyes steadily. "That's what I see." Eleanor's breath caught. For a moment she looked like she might cry. Instead she said, "You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you well enough to know it's true." They sat in silence as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. Closer, they could hear Lily moving around inside the house, her small feet pattering across the floor. "I should make breakfast," Eleanor said, but she didn't move. "I should fix that gate," Caleb replied, but he didn't move either. They sat there together, two broken people watching the sunrise, and for just a moment, the weight of the past felt a little lighter. The days began to blur together in a way that felt less like time passing and more like life settling into itself. Eleanor grew stronger, her movements becoming less cautious, her face losing the pinched quality of someone bracing for the next blow. She still startled at sudden sounds, still positioned herself with her back to walls, but the raw terror that had haunted her eyes began to recede into something more manageable. Lily bloomed in the safety of the ranch like a desert flower after rare rain. She followed Caleb everywhere, asking endless questions in that serious way of hers, absorbing information like she was building a manual for survival. "How deep did you dig a well? Why did horses need their hooves cleaned? What plants could you eat and which ones would kill you?" She stored every answer away with solemn attention, and Caleb found himself explaining things he'd never had to put into words before. One morning, he found her in the chicken coop, having somehow managed to collect the eggs without getting pecked. She carried the basket with both hands, her face scrunched in concentration, and presented it to him like a trophy. "I helped," she announced. "You sure did." He took the basket and examined each egg with exaggerated care. "That's fine work, Lily. Real fine." A smile flickered across her face, there and gone so fast he almost missed it. But it had been there. That was the first time he'd seen her smile since he'd found them in the desert. Eleanor watched these exchanges from the porch, her expression complicated. One afternoon, after Lily had spent 2 hours helping Caleb repair a section of roof, she called her daughter inside for a nap. Lily protested but obeyed, and Eleanor came outside to where Caleb was cleaning his tools. "She's getting attached to you," Eleanor said. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't neutral either. Caleb kept his attention on the hammer he was wiping down. "She's a good kid." "She is, and she's already lost one father. I don't want her losing another." That brought his head up. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "I know, but she's 4 years old, and you're the first man who's shown her kindness without wanting something in return. She doesn't understand that this is temporary." "Does it have to be?" The question hung between them like smoke. Eleanor stared at him, and he could see her trying to work out what he meant. He wasn't entirely sure himself. "We can't stay here forever, Caleb. This isn't our home." "Could be." "That's not—" She stopped, shaking her head. "You don't know what you're saying. You've known us 3 weeks. You don't owe us a life." "I'm not talking about owing anything. I'm talking about—" He set down the hammer and turned to face her fully. "When's the last time this place felt like something other than a tomb I was living in? When's the last time I cooked a meal for someone other than myself, or fixed something because it needed fixing rather than just to pass time? Your daughter asks me questions and actually listens to the answers. You sit on that porch every morning and watch the sun come up like it matters. This place has been more alive in 3 weeks than it's been in 3 years." Eleanor's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "That's not a reason to saddle yourself with someone else's burdens." "Maybe I'm tired of carrying my own alone." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Before she could find words, a sound drifted across the desert. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast. Caleb's hand went instinctively to his hip where a gun would have been if he'd been wearing one. He'd gotten too comfortable, too trusting of the isolation. Eleanor heard it too. The color drained from her face. "They came back." "Get inside," Caleb said quietly. "Take Lily to the back room and don't come out until I say." "Caleb, now!" She ran. He could hear her calling for Lily, hear the panic in her voice even as she tried to control it. Caleb moved to the house and grabbed his rifle from above the door, checking the load with practiced efficiency. His heart hammered, but his hand stayed steady. The war had taught him that much, how to function when your body was screaming at you to run. 5 riders crested the rise. Caleb's breathing steadied slightly when he saw they weren't the rough men who'd attacked Eleanor and Lily. These riders wore decent clothes, and the man in the lead sat his horse with the posture of someone accustomed to authority. But something about the way they approached, purposeful, entitled, set Caleb's teeth on edge. He stepped off the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The riders stopped 20 feet out. The lead man was maybe 50, well-fed and prosperous-looking, with silver threading through his dark hair. His eyes swept over the ranch with the assessment of someone calculating value. "This the Monroe place?" the man asked. "It is, and you're on it without invitation." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My apologies for the intrusion. I'm Richard Hale. I'm looking for my brother's widow and his daughter." Caleb's grip on the rifle didn't change. "What business would you have with them?" "Family business. We've been searching for Eleanor and the child since they disappeared from Santa Fe. We have certain legal matters to discuss." Richard's gaze sharpened. "She is here, isn't she? We traced their last known location to the Phoenix Road, and you're the only homestead for miles. If they were here, why would I tell you?" "Because I'm the girl's uncle, and I have every right to see her. Eleanor might have told you otherwise, but my brother's daughter is a Hale, and the family has certain responsibilities toward her welfare. Responsibilities you didn't seem concerned with when you threw them out after your brother died." Richard's pleasant expression hardened slightly. "I see Eleanor shared her version of events. Did she also mention that she refused the settlement we offered? That she chose to drag a child into poverty rather than accept our perfectly reasonable terms? What terms would those be? That Lily remain with the family to be raised properly, while Eleanor was free to make her own way. The girl is entitled to her father's name, his legacy, his position in society. Eleanor had no right to deny her that future." Understanding hit Caleb like cold water. "You wanted to take the child. We wanted to give her the life she deserves. Education, refinement, opportunities her mother could never provide. Eleanor was welcome to visit, of course, but raising a Hale requires resources and connections she simply doesn't possess. Richard straightened in his saddle. Now, I've answered your questions. Where is my niece? She's not your niece. She's her mother's daughter, and her mother's the only family she needs. That's not your decision to make, Mr. Monroe. I have lawyers prepared to petition for custody on the grounds that Eleanor is an unfit mother who endangered the child's life through negligence and poor judgment, traveling unescorted, putting Lily at risk, exposing her to violence and deprivation. A judge will have no difficulty seeing that the child belongs with family who can properly care for her. Caleb's voice went very quiet. Get off my land. I'm offering Eleanor a way out of this that doesn't involve public scandal and a legal battle she can't afford to fight. If she cooperates, we can arrange a dignified transition. If she refuses, Richard shrugged. We'll take the matter to court, and she'll lose everything, including the ability to see Lily at all. Last chance, get off my land. Richard studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled again, and this time there was pity in it. You care about them. How unfortunate. That will make this harder for everyone. He turned his horse. Tell Eleanor I'll be back with the proper legal documents. She has until then to make the sensible choice. The riders left the way they came, and Caleb stood watching until they disappeared over the rise. Only then did he allow himself to lower the rifle, his hands trembling slightly with an anger so fierce it felt like burning. The door opened behind him. Eleanor stood there, Lily clutched against her side. The little girl's face was buried in her mother's skirt, but Eleanor's eyes were dry and hard as stone. You heard, Caleb said. Every word. Eleanor's voice was remarkably steady. He'll do it. Richard always does exactly what he says he'll do. He'll take her to court, he'll bring lawyers I can't fight, and he'll paint me as exactly what I am. A woman with no money, no family, no prospects, who made choices that put her daughter in danger. He's got no right. He's got every right. That's how it works. Men like Richard, they make the rules, and people like me just live with the consequences. She looked down at Lily, her hand stroking her daughter's hair. I thought if I could just get us away from Santa Fe, if I could make it to Phoenix and find work, we'd be safe. But there's nowhere safe, is there? Not when they decide they want something. Caleb set the rifle aside and crossed to her. What do you want to do? Eleanor laughed, but it was a broken sound. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is Lily, and whether I can live with myself knowing I'm the reason she grows up being told her mother wasn't good enough to raise her. Stop. Caleb's voice cutting through her spiral. I asked what you want to do, not what you think you deserve, not what you're afraid of. What do you actually want? She met his eyes, and he saw the war happening behind hers. Finally, she whispered, I want to keep my daughter. I want her to know she's loved more than she's valuable. I want her to grow up safe and happy and never doubt for 1 second that she was wanted. Her voice broke. But I don't know how to do that anymore. Then we figure it out together. Why? The question came out anguished. Why would you put yourself in the middle of this? Richard has money and power and connections. He'll destroy you too if you get in his way. Let him try. Caleb, you don't understand what you're offering. This isn't some fight you can win with a rifle and good intentions. This is lawyers and judges and a system that's designed to protect men like him and crush people like us. I know exactly what it is, Caleb said quietly. I also know what happens when good people decide a fight's too hard and walk away. I saw enough of that in the war to last a lifetime. I'm not walking away from this. Lily's voice came out muffled against Eleanor's skirt. Is the bad man going to take me away? Eleanor dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter close. No, baby, no. I won't let that happen. Promise? Eleanor's eyes found Caleb's over Lily's head, desperate and drowning. He knelt beside them both. We promise, he said. On our lives. Lily pulled back enough to look at him. You're going to fight the bad man? I'm going to fight anyone who tries to take you away from your mama. That's a promise too. The child considered this with that gravity that made her seem far older than her years. Then she nodded once and burrowed back into Eleanor's embrace. Over her head, Eleanor mouthed 2 words, thank you. But her eyes were still filled with the kind of fear that came from knowing exactly how badly this could go. That night, After Lily had finally cried herself to sleep, Eleanor joined Caleb on the porch. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the desert sounds and the creak of the house settling. "Tell me about Richard," Caleb said eventually. Eleanor drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "He's Thomas's older brother. Always was. Cold, controlled, certain of his own superiority. He runs the family business, import and export, some banking, other ventures I was never privy to. When Thomas died, Richard handled everything with brutal efficiency. Paid the debts, arranged the funeral, made it very clear that I was a problem to be solved. What were his terms, really? Lily would live with him and his wife in their Santa Fe mansion. They'd raise her as a proper lady, give her education and refinement, introduce her to the right people when she came of age. I could visit twice a year, supervised, and I'd receive a small stipend, enough to live on if I was careful and didn't embarrass the family." She laughed bitterly. "He presented it like he was doing me a favor, setting me free from the burden of raising a child in poverty. But you refused." "I told him he could burn in hell." Eleanor's voice gained strength. "Lily is the only good thing that came from my marriage. She's mine. Not his, not the family's. Mine. And I'd rather raise her in poverty and love than wealth and indifference." "So you ran." "I ran. Took what little I had and left in the middle of the night. I knew Richard would look for us eventually, but I thought if I could just get far enough away, if I could establish a life somewhere he couldn't reach." She stopped. "I was naive. Men like Richard always reach." Caleb was quiet, thinking. Then he said, "What if you weren't alone when he came back?" "What do you mean?" "Richard's argument is that you're an unfit mother because you're poor, unprotected, making desperate choices. But what if you weren't any of those things anymore?" Eleanor turned to look at him. "Caleb, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but letting us stay here temporarily isn't going to change a judge's mind. I'm still a widow with no prospects, and Richard will still argue that Lily deserves better." "You wouldn't be a widow if you remarried." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor stared at him like he'd started speaking a different language. "Are you—" She stopped, shook her head. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You've known me 3 weeks. This isn't something you propose as a legal strategy." "Why not?" Caleb kept his voice level, reasonable. "You need stability, protection, a home that can't be questioned. I have land, a house, a reputation as a decent man. We marry, I adopt Lily legally, and Richard loses his argument. A judge isn't going to take a child from a stable married couple just because a rich uncle thinks he can do better." "That's insane," Eleanor whispered. "You'd tie yourself to a stranger, take on responsibility for a child that isn't yours, put yourself in Richard's crosshairs, all to solve a problem that isn't even your problem?" "It became my problem the moment I found you in that desert." "That's not how marriage works, Caleb. That's not— You can't just—" She stood abruptly, pacing across the porch. "Do you have any idea what you'd be giving up? The freedom to live your life however you want, to find someone you actually care about, to not be saddled with baggage you didn't choose." "I spent 3 years in this house alone, Eleanor. 3 years of silence and ghosts and wondering why I bothered surviving the war if this was all life was going to be. Then you and Lily showed up, and suddenly I had a reason to fix the roof and cook decent meals and remember what it feels like to matter to someone." He stood too, facing her. "You think that's baggage? That's the first thing that's felt like living in longer than I can remember." Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears. "You're talking about a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience. I'm talking about making a choice that protects people I care about. If that's convenience, I'll take it. And when you meet someone you actually want to marry, when you realize you've trapped yourself in a life you never wanted— I'm 36 years old, Eleanor. If I was going to meet that person, I'd have met her by now. And this life, quiet, simple, with good people to share it with, this is exactly the life I want." He paused. "But it has to be your choice. I'm offering a solution, not forcing one. If you want to fight Richard another way, we'll find it." Eleanor sank back into the chair, her head in her hands. For a long time, she didn't speak. When she finally looked up, her face was wet with tears. "I can't ask you to do this." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "Why?" The word came out broken. Why would you do this for us? Caleb thought about all the ways he could answer that. Because they needed him. Because he needed them. Because Lily's fierce courage reminded him what it meant to fight for something that mattered. Because Eleanor's determination to protect her daughter made him believe that maybe broken people could still build something worth having. Instead, he said simply, because when I look at you and Lily, I don't see baggage or problems or inconvenience. I see family, and I'd rather fight for family than spend the rest of my life alone. Eleanor's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Caleb crossed to her and knelt, taking her hands in his. You don't have to decide right now, he said gently. Think about it. Figure out if you can live with the arrangement. But know that if you say yes, it's not charity and it's not pity. It's partnership. We face this together and we build something better together, and neither of us has to be alone anymore. She squeezed his hands hard enough to hurt. You're either the best man I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both. That startled a laugh out of her, watery but real. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. I need to think. Take all the time you need. But they both knew time was one thing they didn't have. Richard would be back, and when he came, he'd bring the full weight of money and law with him. The next 3 days passed in tense waiting. Eleanor was quiet, withdrawn, spending hours alone or with Lily, clearly wrestling with the decision. Caleb gave her space, maintaining the routines that had developed, trying to show through action what he couldn't quite articulate in words, that this could work, that they could make a life here together. Lily sensed the tension and became clingy, refusing to let Eleanor out of her sight. At night, Caleb could hear them through the thin walls. Eleanor's voice soft as she sang her daughter to sleep with songs he didn't recognize. Sometimes the singing turned to crying, and those nights he lay awake in the barn, staring at the rafters and wondering if he'd made everything worse with his proposal. On the 4th day, Eleanor found him working on the irrigation ditches that fed his small vegetable garden. She stood at the edge of the plot, her dress stirring in the breeze, her expression unreadable. Can we talk? She asked. He set down the shovel and nodded. Eleanor clasped her hands in front of her, gathering her words. I've been thinking about what you said, about marriage and partnership and building something together. And I need you to understand what you'd be getting. I'm not an easy person, Caleb. I have nightmares. I flinch at sudden movements. I have days where I can barely get out of bed because the weight of everything feels like it's crushing me. I'm suspicious of kindness because kindness has always come with conditions. I'm terrified all the time, of poverty, of men, of making the wrong choice and losing everything again. She paused. And Lily, she's wonderful, but she's also traumatized and grieving and will need patience and understanding that not everyone has. I know. Do you? Because once we do this, there's no taking it back. If you wake up a year from now and regret it, you'll be stuck with us anyway. The law doesn't care if you made a mistake. Caleb wiped his hands on his pants and closed the distance between them. I have nightmares too. About the war. About the friends I watched die. About the things I did that I can't take back. I'm not good with people. I've spent 3 years avoiding them because conversation feels like dragging broken glass across my skin. I get angry sometimes, at nothing and everything, and I have to walk it off before I say things I don't mean. I'm not a prize, Eleanor. I'm just a man trying to be better than he was yesterday. That's not a recommendation for marriage. Neither is yours. But maybe that's the point. We're both broken people who know exactly how sharp our edges are. We're not going into this blind expecting perfection. We're going in knowing it'll be hard and choosing it anyway. Eleanor's eyes searched his face. What if I can't love you the way a wife should? What if I can't either? Maybe we build something different, something based on respect and partnership and shared purpose. Maybe that's enough. And if it's not, then we'll figure it out, together. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Lily asked me this morning if you were going to stay. I told her I didn't know, and she said, I want him to stay, Mama. He makes you smile. Eleanor's voice cracked. I didn't even realize I'd been smiling. Caleb waited, hardly breathing. If we do this, Eleanor said slowly, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If it doesn't work, if we realize we've made a terrible mistake, you'll let us go with dignity. No bitterness, no anger, no making Lily feel like she's the reason everything fell apart. I promise. But I need a promise from you too. What? That you'll actually try. That you won't spend every day waiting for me to turn into someone cruel or looking for reasons this won't work or protecting yourself so hard that you never let yourself be part of this family. He held her gaze. If we're doing this, we're really doing it. Not halfway, not with one foot out the door. All in. Eleanor's breath hitched. That terrifies me. I know. Me too. But you're willing to try anyway? I am. She closed her eyes, and he could see her trembling with the weight of the decision. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression. Not certainty exactly, but determination. All right, she whispered. Let's do this. Let's get married and fight Richard and build something together and pray to God we're not making the biggest mistake of our lives. Caleb felt something in his chest expand, warm and almost painful. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He held out his hand. She took it. Her palm was rough with work, her fingers thin and strong. They stood there in the garden, hands clasped, and made a promise that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with survival and stubbornness, and the desperate hope that two broken people might somehow make each other whole. We should tell Lily, Eleanor said. They found her in the barn, playing with a litter of kittens that had been born a week earlier. She looked up when they entered, her expression immediately wary. Are you leaving? She asked, directing the question at Caleb. No, I'm staying. In fact, I'm going to be staying for good. He crouched down to her level. Your mama and I are going to get married. That means I'll be your papa, if that's all right with you. Lily looked between them, her small face serious. Does that mean the bad man can't take me? That's exactly what it means, Eleanor said, kneeling beside Caleb. Nobody's going to take you anywhere, baby. You're staying right here with me and Caleb. Promise? Promise, they said together. Lily thought about this for a moment. Then she launched herself at Caleb with enough force to knock him backward. He caught her automatically, wrapping his arms around her small body as she buried her face in his shoulder. I want you to be my papa, she said, her voice muffled. I want you to stay forever. Caleb's throat tightened. He looked at Eleanor over Lily's head and saw his own overwhelming emotion reflected in her eyes. Then that's what I'll do, he said. I'll stay forever. Eleanor joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them, and for a moment they were just three people holding on to each other like lifelines, trying to believe that maybe, against all odds, this desperate plan might actually work. They were married 3 days later in the small church in town, with the minister's wife and the general store owner as witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple dress she'd mended herself, her hair pinned back in a way that made her look younger than her years. Caleb had borrowed a proper shirt from his neighbor, though it pulled tight across his shoulders. Lily stood between them, holding both their hands, her broken stick tucked carefully into the sash of her dress like a talisman. The ceremony was brief, practical, the minister rushing through the words like he had somewhere else to be. When Caleb kissed Eleanor to seal the vows, it was chaste and awkward, their lips barely touching before they both pulled back. But when he lifted Lily into his arms afterward and she wrapped her small arms around his neck, something in his chest settled into place. We're a family now, Lily announced to the handful of witnesses. Forever and ever. That's right, Caleb said, his voice rough. Forever and ever. Eleanor's eyes were suspiciously bright as they signed the register. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote Eleanor Monroe for the first time, the ink blotting where she paused too long. Caleb signed his own name, then the adoption papers the minister had prepared, making Lily legally his daughter. When it was done, they were bound together by law and witness, a family constructed out of necessity but real nonetheless. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Lily fell asleep against Eleanor's shoulder, worn out by the emotion of the day. Caleb drove the wagon with steady hands, acutely aware of the woman beside him, this stranger who was now his wife. Eleanor stared out at the desert, her expression unreadable. Having second thoughts? He asked quietly. She turned to look at him, and something like a smile flickered across her face. Constant second thoughts, but also relief. Is that strange? No, I feel the same way. Like we've just stepped off a cliff and we're not sure if we can fly or if we're just falling. Exactly like that. Eleanor shifted Lily's weight slightly, settling the child more comfortably. Caleb, I need you to know something. I'm going to try. To be a good wife, to make this work, to not let my fear ruin what we're building. But I've been hurt enough times that trust doesn't come easy. If I'm cold sometimes, or distant, or if I push you away, then I'll give you space until you're ready to let me back in. I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. You've got time to learn that. She nodded, looking away again, but her free hand found his on the wagon seat and squeezed once before letting go. It was the smallest gesture, barely anything, but it felt like progress. When they arrived home, and it was home now, officially, legally, Caleb carried Lily inside and laid her gently in the bed. She stirred enough to mumble something incoherent before burrowing into the blankets. Eleanor stood in the doorway watching, her arms wrapped around herself. I'll take the main room, Caleb said quietly. You and Lily keep the bedroom. We can figure out other arrangements later, if... He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Thank you, Eleanor said, for understanding that I need time. Take all you need. But that night, after Eleanor had settled Lily and retreated to the bedroom, Caleb lay on the cot in the main room and wondered what exactly they'd gotten themselves into. He could hear Eleanor moving around, the soft sounds of her preparing for sleep, and felt the strangeness of sharing space with someone again after so long alone. The house felt different with them in it, warmer, but also more complicated, filled with the weight of unspoken expectations and uncertain futures. He was still awake when he heard the bedroom door open. Eleanor emerged in her nightdress, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking younger and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. I can't sleep, she said. Every time I close my eyes, I see Richard's face and imagine him finding some way to take her anyway. Caleb sat up. The law's on our side now. You're married, Lily's adopted, you have a stable home. That's what judges care about. Richard has money. Money buys lawyers who can make the law say whatever serves them best. Then we get our own lawyer, a good one. Eleanor laughed bitterly. With what money? Caleb, I know you're trying to help, but you can't honestly think we can fight Richard on his level. He'll bury us in legal fees before we ever see the inside of a courtroom. We'll find a way. He stood and moved to the small desk where he kept his papers. I've got some money saved. Not a lot, but enough to at least consult with someone. And the ranch is profitable. We can sell some livestock if we need to. I won't let you bankrupt yourself for this. It's not for you. It's for us. That's what marriage means, right? Your problems are my problems now. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and did something that surprised them both. She put her arms around him and held on. It was tentative, careful, her body stiff like she was waiting for rejection. Caleb froze for a heartbeat before wrapping his arms around her in return, feeling how thin she still was, how much she was trembling. I'm so tired of being afraid, she whispered against his chest. I'm tired of running and hiding and waiting for the next disaster. I want to believe we can actually win this. We will. You can't know that. No, but I can fight like hell to make it true. She pulled back enough to look up at him, and in the lamplight her eyes were huge and dark. What if fighting isn't enough? What if Richard comes with judges and lawyers and documents, and they take her while we watch? What if being married to me ends up being the worst decision you ever made? Then it'll still be my decision, mine to make, mine to live with. You don't get to carry all the guilt, Eleanor. We're in this together. Something in her expression cracked. I don't know how to do this. How to be a wife to someone who's not... She stopped, shaking her head. Thomas, he expected certain things, demanded them, and I learned to just endure. But you're not like that, and I don't know what you expect from me. Caleb's hands tightened on her shoulders. I expect you to be honest with me, to tell me when you're scared or angry or need space. I expect you to be a partner, not a servant, and I expect you to remember that you're not alone anymore. He paused. As for the rest, whatever happens between us, it happens when we both want it to, not before. No obligations, no demands, just two people figuring things out as they go. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Why are you so kind to me? Why wouldn't I be? Because most men aren't. Because kindness usually comes with conditions. Because I keep waiting for you to show me who you really are underneath all this decency. This is who I really am, Eleanor. A man who made you a promise and intends to keep it. He released her shoulders and stepped back, giving her space. Now go to bed. Try to rest. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to fight Richard properly. She nodded and turned to go, but paused at the bedroom door. Caleb, thank you for all of this, for being, her voice caught, for being you. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, and Caleb was alone again with his thoughts and the strange new reality of being a married man with a family to protect. Richard returned exactly 1 week later, just as he'd promised. This time he brought a lawyer, a thin, severe man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the manner of someone accustomed to intimidating people with words. They rode up to the ranch in a fancy carriage that looked absurd against the desert backdrop, followed by 2 hired men on horseback. Caleb met them in the yard, Eleanor and Lily behind him. He'd made sure they were both dressed properly, Eleanor in her best dress with her hair neat, Lily clean and well-fed and clearly cared for. First impressions mattered, and he wanted these men to see a family, not victims. Richard stepped down from the carriage with theatrical precision, his eyes sweeping over the ranch before landing on Eleanor. Eleanor, I see you've made some changes since we last spoke. I've made a life, Eleanor said, her voice steady. This is my husband, Caleb Monroe, and as you can see, Lily is happy and healthy and exactly where she belongs. Richard's smile was cold. How convenient. A marriage of 3 weeks to a man you barely know, clearly designed to circumvent my legitimate claim to the child. He gestured to the lawyer. This is Mr. Pemberton. He's here to serve you with legal notice of our intent to pursue full custody of Lily Hale on the grounds that her mother has demonstrated a pattern of dangerous judgment and instability. Pemberton stepped forward, producing a sheaf of papers. Mrs. Monroe, you are hereby notified that we will be filing a petition with the territorial court seeking to remove the minor child from your custody and place her with Mr. Richard Hale, her legal guardian by blood relation and superior means. Eleanor's face went white, but she didn't move. Caleb stepped forward, putting himself between the lawyer and his family. Lily Monroe, he corrected. She was legally adopted as my daughter 3 days ago. Her name is Lily Monroe, and her guardian is her mother and me. Whatever claim you think you have died the moment that adoption was finalized. Richard's expression hardened. An adoption rushed through by a country judge who didn't bother to investigate whether the child's interests were actually being served. We'll challenge it. On what grounds? On the grounds that Eleanor married you specifically to prevent the child from being placed in a proper home. On the grounds that this ranch is isolated and inadequate for raising a young girl. On the grounds that you, Mr. Monroe, are a stranger with no blood relation and no genuine interest in the child beyond whatever arrangement you've made with her mother. Caleb's jaw tightened. You don't know a damn thing about my interest in that little girl. Don't I? You're a hermit who's lived alone for years, known in town as someone who avoids company and keeps to himself. You have no experience with children, no family to speak of, nothing that qualifies you to raise a Hale heir. Richard's voice took on an edge. My brother made mistakes, but his daughter deserves better than this. Better than a desperate widow and a recluse playing house in the middle of nowhere. That's enough. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stepped around Caleb, her chin high despite the fear Caleb could see in her eyes. Say what you want about me, Richard. Call me desperate, call me unstable, call me whatever serves your purpose. But don't you dare stand there and pretend you care about Lily's well-being. You want her because she's a Hale, because having Thomas's daughter under your control gives you some kind of claim to righteousness after years of treating him like a disappointment. But you don't love her. You've never even met her. She's a possession to you, nothing more. And what is she to you? Richard shot back. A meal ticket? A way to trap a husband? You've used that child as leverage since the day she was born, and now you've found someone fool enough to take you both on. But courts see through these arrangements, Eleanor. They see mothers who put their own needs above their children's futures. Lily's small voice cut through the argument. I want to stay with my mama and my papa. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood with her broken stick in hand, her face set in lines of fierce determination that made her look far older than 4. "I don't know you," she said, looking directly at Richard. "You're a stranger. But Caleb is my papa now, and he takes care of us, and I want to stay here." Richard's expression flickered, something almost like surprise before it hardened again. Children don't decide these matters. Adults who understand what's best for them do. "You mean adults who want to control them," Caleb said quietly. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not Lily's welfare, but your need to dictate how she's raised, who she becomes, what use she can be to you and your reputation." Pemberton cleared his throat. "Mr. Monroe, I advise you not to make accusations you can't substantiate. My client's intentions are entirely proper and motivated by familial concern. Your client's intentions are to take a child from the only parent who's ever loved her and install her in a house where she'll be raised by strangers who see her as a project instead of a person." Caleb crossed his arms. "You want to fight, Richard? We'll give you one. But know that we're not backing down and we're not intimidating easy." Richard studied him for a long moment, then smiled that cold smile again. How admirable. The war hero standing up for the helpless widow and child. It's quite touching, really. Unfortunately, sentiment doesn't win cases. Evidence does. And the evidence will show that Eleanor put this child in mortal danger through reckless choices, that this marriage is a transparent fraud, and that Lily deserves a proper home with family who can provide for her future. The evidence will show a mother who fought to protect her daughter, a legal marriage, and a child who's thriving, Eleanor countered. Whatever story you try to tell, the truth is that Lily is safe, healthy, and loved. That's what matters. We'll let a judge decide what matters. Richard turned back toward the carriage. "You have 30 days to prepare your defense, though I suspect you'll find it difficult to secure representation. Most lawyers in the territory know better than to oppose me." He paused at the carriage door. "I'm giving you one last chance, Eleanor. Surrender the child willingly, accept a generous settlement, and you can visit her quarterly under supervision. Refuse, and I'll make sure you never see her again." "Go to hell, Richard." He smiled. "I'll see you in court." The carriage pulled away, leaving dust and dread in its wake. The moment they were out of sight, Eleanor's knees buckled. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight as tremors racked her body. "He's going to win," she gasped. "He's going to take her, and there's nothing we can do to stop him. Breathe, Eleanor. Just breathe." Lily pressed against her mother's side, her small face frightened. "Mama? Are you okay?" Eleanor forced herself upright, gathering her daughter into her arms with desperate strength. "I'm okay, baby. We're okay. We're going to be okay." But her eyes told Caleb a different story. She was terrified, drowning in the certainty that they were outmatched and outmaneuvered, that this fight was lost before it began. Caleb helped them both inside, settled them on the sofa, and then did the only thing he could think of. He saddled his horse and rode to town, to the small law office above the general store where an attorney named Samuel Cross practiced. Cross was younger than Caleb expected, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and the earnest manner of someone still idealistic enough to believe in justice. "I need help," Caleb said without preamble. "My daughter's uncle is trying to take her from us, and he's got money and lawyers and every advantage. We need someone who's willing to fight anyway." Cross listened to the whole story without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as Caleb spoke. When Caleb finished, the lawyer sat back in his chair and whistled low. "Richard Hale. I know of him. He's got half the judges in the territory in his pocket, either through business connections or outright bribes. This isn't going to be easy." "I know." "And you're certain the marriage is legal? The adoption paperwork was filed properly?" "All of it. We did everything by the book." Cross tapped his pen against the desk, thinking. "Hale's strategy will be to prove the marriage was a fraud, entered into solely to prevent him from claiming custody. He'll argue that you're not a fit parent because you're a stranger to the child, that Eleanor's judgment is compromised, that the ranch is inadequate. He'll paint a picture of desperation and deception, and he'll make it sound like removing Lily is a rescue operation. Can we beat that? Maybe. If we can show that the marriage is genuine, that Lily is genuinely attached to you both, that she's thriving in your care, If we can demonstrate that Hale's motivations are about control rather than the child's welfare. If we can find a judge who isn't already bought and paid for. Cross met Caleb's eyes. It's a long shot, Mr. Monroe. I won't lie to you about that. But you'll take the case? Cross was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. I'll take it. On two conditions. First, you're completely honest with me about everything. No surprises in court. Second, you understand that we might lose, and if we do, there's nothing more I can do. We understand. Good. Then let's get to work. They spent the next 2 hours going over every detail, how Caleb had found Eleanor and Lily, the timeline of events, the marriage and adoption, every interaction with Richard. Cross took notes in careful script, occasionally stopping to ask questions that made Caleb uncomfortable, but he answered anyway. This man needed the full truth if he was going to defend them. One thing I need you to understand, Cross said as Caleb was leaving. Richard Hale is going to try to destroy your wife's character. He'll dig up every mistake she's ever made, every desperate choice, every moment of vulnerability, and he'll use it to paint her as unfit. Are you prepared for that? Caleb thought of Eleanor, scarred and scared but still fighting, still refusing to surrender the one thing that mattered to her. Let him try. All he'll prove is that she survived things that would have broken weaker people. Cross smiled slightly. Good answer. Now go home and prepare your family. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than it had any right to. Caleb's mind churned with everything Cross had said, all the ways this could go wrong, all the vulnerabilities Richard would exploit. By the time he reached home, dusk was falling, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold. He found Eleanor and Lily in the kitchen. Eleanor was teaching her daughter to make bread, their hands covered in flour, and for a moment Caleb just stood in the doorway watching them. This was what Richard wanted to destroy. This simple, ordinary moment of a mother teaching her child, of Lily laughing when the dough stuck to her fingers, of Eleanor smiling despite the fear that must be eating her alive. We have a lawyer, Caleb announced. Eleanor's hands stilled. We do? Samuel Cross. He's young, but he's smart, and he's willing to fight. He thinks we've got a chance if we can prove the marriage is genuine and Lily's genuinely thriving here. And if we can't, Caleb crossed to them, putting his hands on Eleanor's shoulders, then we'll have tried everything. But I'm not thinking about losing yet. I'm thinking about how we win. Lily tugged at his sleeve, leaving a flower handprint on his shirt. Papa, do you know how to make bread? The word hit him like a physical blow. Papa. She'd said it so naturally, like she'd been calling him that her whole life instead of just a week. No, sweetheart, I don't, but I bet you and your mama can teach me. Eleanor's eyes were wet as she watched him kneel down to Lily's level, as their daughter, because she was theirs now, legally and emotionally, began explaining the intricacies of kneading dough with the seriousness of a general planning battle strategy. And Caleb thought maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at this after all. Because Richard could buy lawyers and judges. He could twist facts and manufacture arguments. But he couldn't manufacture this. The way Lily trusted them both completely. The way Eleanor's shoulders relaxed when Caleb was near. The way the three of them fit together like pieces of a puzzle, finally finding their proper places. That night, after Lily was asleep, Eleanor joined Caleb on the porch again. It was becoming a ritual, these quiet conversations under the stars, the two of them processing the impossibility of everything they were attempting. Cross said Richard will try to destroy my character, Eleanor said quietly. He'll make me sound like the worst kind of mother, selfish and desperate and willing to use my daughter for my own ends. Let him try. It's true, though, some of it. I did make desperate choices. I did put Lily at risk by traveling alone. I did marry you partly to keep her safe. You made the choices you had to make to survive. That's not the same as being selfish. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When I was lying in that desert, when I thought I was dying, and all I could think about was Lily being alone, I made a promise. I promised that if I survived, I would never stop fighting for her, that I would do whatever it took to keep her safe and loved and free. She looked at Caleb. Marrying you was part of keeping that promise, but it's become something else too, something I didn't expect. What's that? A second chance, at having a partner, at not facing everything alone. At maybe, eventually, being happy again. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. You scare me, Caleb Monroe, because every day I'm around you, I believe a little more that this might actually work. And I'm terrified of what happens if I'm wrong. Caleb reached for her hand in the darkness, threading his fingers through hers. You're not wrong. We're building something real here, Eleanor. It started as survival, but it's becoming more. Can you feel it? Yes, she breathed. That's what terrifies me. They sat in silence, hands clasped, while the desert sang its night song around them. And somewhere in the darkness, Richard Hale was preparing his attack, gathering weapons and strategy, ready to tear their fragile new family apart. But here, now, they had this moment. This quiet, honest connection. This choice to believe that broken people could build something beautiful if they were just brave enough to try. The war was coming, but tonight they had each other. And that would have to be enough. The weeks leading up to the court date passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Samuel Cross visited the ranch twice, interviewing both Caleb and Eleanor separately, asking questions that probed every corner of their lives. He needed to know everything, he explained, because Richard's lawyers would leave no stone unturned in their effort to prove the marriage was fraudulent and Eleanor unfit. They'll ask about your sleeping arrangements, Cross said bluntly during one session. They'll want to know if this is a real marriage or just a legal convenience. Eleanor's face flushed, but she met his eyes steadily. We share a home and a life. The specifics of our private arrangements are nobody's business. I agree, but a judge might see it differently. If you're living as strangers under one roof, it supports their argument that this is a sham. Caleb spoke up from where he stood by the window. We're building a marriage, not performing one for an audience. It takes time to trust someone enough to share everything, especially when you've been hurt before. Any reasonable person would understand that. Cross made a note. I'll frame it that way. But understand that they'll paint it as evidence of fraud, that you married for convenience and nothing more. Then they'll be wrong, Eleanor said quietly. It started as convenience, but it's becoming something real. Slowly, carefully, but real nonetheless. The lawyer studied her for a moment, then nodded. That's good. That's what we need the judge to see. Not a desperate arrangement, but a genuine family forming at its own pace. After Cross left, Eleanor retreated to the bedroom, her shoulders tight with stress. Caleb found her an hour later sitting on the bed, staring at nothing. I hate this, she said without looking at him. I hate having our lives dissected and judged. I hate that strangers get to decide if I'm worthy of my own daughter. Caleb sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. I know. Do you? Have you ever had to stand in front of people and justify your right to exist, to make choices, to keep the one thing that matters most to you? No, he admitted. But I've stood in front of people who decided my life had less value than their cause, who sent me to kill and die for reasons that stopped making sense somewhere between the first battle and the last. And I've spent years wondering if I survived just to live alone and angry until I couldn't remember why I bothered. He paused. This is different. This is fighting for something that actually matters, and I'd rather lose fighting for you and Lily than win at anything else. Eleanor turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Why? Why do we matter so much to you? You barely knew us when you made this commitment. I knew enough. I knew you were brave enough to keep your daughter alive in the desert with nothing but will. I knew Lily was fierce enough to stand guard with a broken stick against the whole world. I knew that when I heard her crying, something in me that I thought the war had killed woke up and told me to care again. He met her gaze. Maybe that's not the romantic answer you'd find in books, but it's the truth. You made me want to be alive again, instead of just surviving. A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. I don't know how to be what you need. You don't have to be anything except yourself. That's all I'm asking. What if myself isn't enough? What if I'm too damaged, too scared, too... Caleb took her hand, silencing her spiral. Then you're damaged and scared, and I'll stand beside you anyway. That's what this is, Eleanor. Not perfection, just presence. Just showing up for each other even when it's hard. She squeezed his hand so tight it hurt. I'm trying. I need you to know I'm trying. I know. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped in the gathering darkness, drawing strength from each other's presence even when words failed. The night before the hearing, none of them could sleep. Lily had nightmares and woke crying, calling for both her parents. They took turns comforting her, then eventually all ended up in the big bed together. Eleanor in the middle, Lily curled against her side, Caleb on the other edge maintaining respectful distance, but close enough that Lily could reach out and touch his hand when she needed reassurance. "Tell me a story, Papa," Lily whispered into the darkness. "A happy one." Caleb thought for a moment, then began. "Once upon a time, there was a man who lived all alone in the desert. He was a good man, but he was lonely, and he'd forgotten what it felt like to have people to care for. Then one day, he heard a sound in the distance, a brave little girl calling for help. When he found her, she was standing guard over the most important person in her world, refusing to leave even though she was scared. The man was so impressed by her courage that he decided to help her. And do you know what happened then?" "What?" Lily's voice was drowsy but engaged. "He discovered that helping her and her mother made him remember what it felt like to have a family. They taught him that home wasn't a place, it was people. And even though there were difficult times ahead, they all decided that being together was worth fighting for. So they became a real family, and they lived in that desert ranch, taking care of each other and the land, and they were happy." "Is that us?" Lily asked. "That's us," Caleb confirmed. "I like that story." Lily's breathing was already evening out, sleep pulling her under. "Tell it again tomorrow, after we win." Eleanor's hand found Caleb's across the blanket, her fingers trembling. He held on tight, both of them silently promising to make that happy ending true, no matter what it took. The courtroom was smaller than Caleb had expected, a converted meeting hall with rough wooden benches and windows that let in harsh morning light. Judge Aldrich sat behind a scarred desk that served as a bench, a man in his 60s with gray mutton chops and eyes that revealed nothing. Richard and his lawyer occupied one table, looking confident and expensive in their tailored suits. Caleb, Eleanor, and Samuel Cross sat at the other, Eleanor gripping Caleb's hand beneath the table hard enough to cut off circulation. Lily sat with the minister's wife in the front row, her broken stick clutched tight, her eyes huge and frightened. Cross had debated whether to have her present, ultimately deciding that the judge needed to see the child at the center of this case, needed to witness her attachment to her parents. "All rise," the bailiff called, though everyone was already standing. Judge Aldrich surveyed the room with the weary expression of a man who'd seen every possible variation of human conflict and found none of it surprising anymore. "Be seated. We're here regarding the petition of Richard Hale for custody of the minor child known as Lily Monroe. Previously, Lily Hale. Mr. Pemberton, you may proceed." Pemberton stood, adjusting his spectacles. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. The child's mother, Eleanor Monroe, has demonstrated a pattern of reckless judgment that culminated in nearly getting herself and her daughter killed. Rather than accept the reasonable assistance offered by Mr. Hale, the child's uncle and nearest blood relation, Mrs. Monroe instead entered into a hasty marriage with a virtual stranger for the transparent purpose of preventing my client from exercising his rightful guardianship." "Your Honor," Cross interjected, rising, "the characterization of events is not only inaccurate but deliberately inflammatory. Mrs. Monroe was the victim of a violent crime, not the perpetrator of reckless behavior. Her marriage to Mr. Monroe is entirely legal and motivated by genuine affection and mutual respect. And the adoption of Lily Monroe by Mr. Monroe was properly executed and filed, making him the child's legal father." "We challenge the validity of that adoption," Pemberton shot back. "It was obtained through fraudulent means, specifically to circumvent my client's superior claim." Judge Aldrich held up a hand. "Gentlemen, we'll get to all of this in due course. Mr. Pemberton, present your case." What followed was a systematic dismantling of Eleanor's entire life. Pemberton called witnesses who testified about her poverty in Santa Fe, the rough neighborhoods she'd lived in, the long hours she'd worked leaving Lily with questionable caregivers. He produced financial records showing her debts, employment records showing her instability, testimonies from people who barely knew her painting her as desperate and irresponsible. Mrs. Monroe chose to travel to Phoenix with insufficient funds and no concrete employment prospects, Pemberton argued. She put herself and a 4-year-old child at the mercy of strangers, resulting in a violent attack that nearly killed them both. This is not the behavior of a fit mother. This is the behavior of someone whose judgment is so compromised that she cannot be trusted with a child's welfare. Eleanor sat frozen beside Caleb, her face pale, as her worst moments were paraded before the court like evidence of criminal incompetence. Caleb wanted to object, to shout that survival wasn't a crime, but Cross had warned him to stay silent unless called to testify. Then Pemberton turned his attention to Caleb. "Mr. Monroe is by all accounts a decent man, but he's also a recluse with no experience raising children, no family support, and no apparent motivation for this marriage beyond whatever arrangement he's made with Mrs. Monroe. They've known each other less than 2 months, married within weeks, and, Your Honor, I have testimony that they maintain separate sleeping quarters. Hardly the behavior of a genuine married couple." Cross stood immediately. "Objection. The intimacies of my client's marriage are not relevant to this proceeding." "They're relevant when determining if the marriage is fraudulent," Pemberton countered. Judge Aldrich frowned. "I'll allow limited inquiry into the nature of the relationship, but tread carefully, Mr. Pemberton. I won't have this court turned into a venue for salacious speculation." "Of course, Your Honor. I'm simply establishing that this marriage was entered into for legal convenience, not genuine affection, which speaks to its validity and therefore to the validity of the adoption that followed." When Cross finally got his chance to present their case, he called Caleb to the stand first. Caleb took the oath with steady hands, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "Mr. Monroe, how did you meet your wife and daughter?" Cross asked. Caleb told the story simply, hearing Lily's cry in the desert, finding them abandoned and injured, bringing them home, caring for Eleanor through her fever, watching Lily's fierce protective instincts. He didn't embellish or dramatize. He just told the truth. "And when did you decide to marry Mrs. Monroe?" "When I realized that Richard Hale intended to take Lily away from the only parent who'd ever loved her. When I understood that the law might side with money and blood relation over actual care and devotion. When it became clear that I could help protect them, and that protecting them was something I wanted to do." "So it was a marriage of convenience?" Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. "It started that way. But somewhere between the proposal and the wedding, it became something more. I watched Eleanor fight through pain and fear to be strong for her daughter. I watched Lily trust me with pieces of her hurt that she hadn't shown anyone else. I watched them both start to heal in an environment where they felt safe, and I realized I wanted that to continue, not because of any legal strategy, but because they'd become my family." "You live separately from your wife?" "We share a home. Eleanor and Lily have the bedroom. I sleep in the main room. It's an arrangement that respects Eleanor's need for time and space to build trust after being hurt by her first husband." Caleb's voice hardened slightly. "Trust isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. We're earning it from each other, at our own pace." Pemberton stood for cross-examination, his smile sharp. "Mr. Monroe, you testified that you wanted to protect Mrs. Monroe and her daughter. Would you say you're a protective person by nature?" "I'd say I believe in helping people who need it. During the war, you served with distinction. Killed quite a few men, didn't you?" Cross objected immediately. "Relevance, Your Honor." "I'm establishing Mr. Monroe's character and capacity for violence," Pemberton said smoothly. Judge Aldrich considered. "I'll allow it, but get to your point quickly, Mr. Pemberton." Pemberton turned back to Caleb. "You have a temper, don't you, Mr. Monroe? A history of solving problems with force." "I have a history of surviving a war. That's not the same thing." "But you live isolated. You avoid people. You've been described by neighbors as unfriendly and volatile. Is that really the environment a young girl should be raised in?" "I'm private, not volatile. And Lily's thriving on the ranch. She's safe, healthy, learning, and loved. That's the environment every child should have. You've known this child for less than 2 months, yet you claim to love her?" "I do love her. She's my daughter." "By law, perhaps. But you're not her father. You're a stranger who married her mother for—" "I'm the man who tucks her in at night when she has nightmares," Caleb interrupted, his voice low and intense. "I'm the man she calls Papa and trusts to keep her safe. I'm the man who'd die before I let anyone hurt her. If that doesn't make me her father, I don't know what does. Pemberton's smile widened. Passionate words, Mr. Monroe. But passion isn't stability, and it's stability this child needs. When Eleanor took the stand, Caleb could see her shaking despite her efforts to hide it. Cross led her through her testimony gently. Her marriage to Thomas, his death, her struggle to survive, her decision to seek better opportunities in Phoenix. Mrs. Monroe, Mr. Pemberton has characterized your journey to Phoenix as reckless. How do you respond to that? Eleanor lifted her chin. I respond that I did what I had to do to give my daughter a chance at a better life. Was it risky? Yes. Did I have other options? No. I had no family support, no savings, no opportunities in Santa Fe. I'd heard there were jobs in Phoenix, good wages, a chance to build something stable. I saved every penny I could, I planned carefully, and I set out hoping for the best. Her voice broke slightly. I didn't plan on being attacked. I didn't plan on nearly dying in the desert. But when it happened, I fought to survive because my daughter needed me. That's not recklessness. That's a mother doing everything in her power to protect her child. Why did you refuse Mr. Hale's offer to take custody of Lily? Because he wasn't offering to care for her. He was offering to own her. He wanted to erase me from her life, to raise her as a Hale asset rather than as my daughter. He wanted control, not connection. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed strong. I know what it's like to be raised by people who see you as a burden or a bargaining chip. I lived it after my father died. I would never, ever condemn Lily to that life, no matter how wealthy or respectable the people offering it. And your marriage to Caleb Monroe? Eleanor looked at Caleb, and something in her expression softened. When Richard threatened to take Lily, I was terrified. Caleb offered a solution, marriage and adoption, to establish legal standing. I accepted because I was desperate, but it became something more, something I didn't expect. Caleb is kind and patient and decent in ways I'd forgotten men could be. He's given us safety and stability and room to heal. He's become a true father to Lily and a true partner to me. It might have started as strategy, but it's become real. It's become family. Pemberton's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned every choice Eleanor had made, implied she'd seduced Caleb for security, suggested she was using Lily as a tool to manipulate sympathy. Eleanor answered each attack with quiet dignity, but Caleb could see it destroying her, could see each barb landing and drawing blood even if she didn't show it. Mrs. Monroe, you claimed to put your daughter first, yet you dragged her into danger, married a stranger, and now refuse to give her opportunities for education and refinement that you yourself cannot provide. How is any of that putting Lily first? Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. I'm giving her love, unconditional, absolute love. I'm giving her a home where she's valued for who she is, not what she represents. I'm giving her parents who choose her every single day, not relatives who want to control her. That's what children need, not opportunities and refinement, but love and security and the knowledge that they matter. Touching sentiment, but sentiment doesn't pay for schooling or ensure proper social development or provide the connections that will serve her in adulthood. My daughter is 4 years old. She needs a mother who loves her, not a social climber who sees her as a project. The final witness was Richard himself. He took the stand with confidence, portraying himself as the concerned uncle trying to salvage his niece's future from her mother's poor judgment. I offered Eleanor every reasonable assistance, he testified. Financial support, a place for Lily in my home, opportunities for education and social advancement. I asked only that Lily be raised with the dignity and prospects befitting a Hale. Eleanor refused, choosing instead to condemn the child to poverty and now to an isolated ranch with strangers. Mr. Hale, why do you believe you should have custody of Lily? Cross asked during cross-examination. Because I can provide for her in ways her mother cannot. Because she deserves the stability of family connections and proper guidance. Because I love my brother despite his flaws, and his daughter deserves better than the life Eleanor's choices have given her. You loved your brother? Is that why you paid his debts and then threw his widow and child out with barely enough money to survive? Richard's expression hardened. I fulfilled my obligations to Thomas's memory. What Eleanor chose to do with the settlement I offered was her decision. A settlement that required her to surrender custody of her child. A settlement that would have ensured Lily's future. Eleanor's pride got in the way of her daughter's well-being, or perhaps her maternal instinct recognized that you cared more about control than about Lily's happiness. Objection, Pemberton called. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Aldrich said. Mr. Cross, move on. Cross shifted tactics. Mr. Hale, have you met Lily? Briefly, when she was an infant. Have you visited her since? Sent letters, gifts, shown any interest in her well-being? I've been searching for them since Eleanor disappeared from Santa Fe. That's not what I asked. Before Eleanor left, did you maintain a relationship with your niece? Richard hesitated. Thomas and I were not close in his final years. I regret that distance now. So you had no relationship with Lily before this custody petition? You don't know her favorite color, her fears, what makes her laugh. You're a stranger to her. I'm her blood family. That relationship exists regardless of current familiarity. But Mr. Monroe, who's known Lily for 2 months, can tell you she's afraid of the dark but brave about everything else. He knows she loves stories about brave girls and animals. He knows she sleeps with a broken stick she used to protect her mother in the desert. He knows these things because he pays attention, because he cares about who she is rather than what she represents. Cross leaned forward. You want custody of a child you don't know, have never tried to know, because you believe blood matters more than love. Is that accurate? I believe a child deserves the best possible future, and I can provide that. Or you believe a Hale should be raised by Hales, regardless of what's actually best for the individual child. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of cold anger crossing his face. I believe children need stability, resources, and proper guidance, not fairy tales about love conquering poverty. The courtroom fell silent. Cross let the words hang there for a moment, then nodded. No further questions. Judge Aldrich called for closing arguments. Pemberton spoke first, weaving a narrative of Eleanor's failures and Richard's superior fitness, painting the marriage as obvious fraud and the adoption as invalid. He argued passionately for Lily's removal to proper guardianship, for her salvation from a life of poverty and isolation. Then Cross stood, and his voice was quiet but fierce. Your Honor, this case isn't complicated. It's about whether we value blood over bonds, money over love, convenience over commitment. Richard Hale is a stranger to Lily. He doesn't know her, hasn't tried to know her, and wants custody not because he loves her, but because he believes he owns her by right of relation. Meanwhile, Eleanor Monroe has sacrificed everything to keep her daughter safe and loved. Caleb Monroe has opened his home and his heart to a child who needed a father and has become exactly that. A real father who shows up every day, who comforts her nightmares, who teaches her and protects her and values her for who she is. Cross gestured to where Lily sat clutching her broken stick. That little girl knows who her family is. She knows who loves her, and she knows who she wants to be with. This court can choose to honor that knowledge, or it can decide that money and blood matter more than a child's own voice. But if you choose the latter, Your Honor, you'll be tearing apart a real family to satisfy a stranger's sense of entitlement. Judge Aldrich was silent for a long moment after both lawyers finished. Then he said, I'll take this under advisement and issue my ruling tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned. The wait was agony. They returned to the ranch in silence, Lily falling asleep against Eleanor in the wagon, exhausted from the stress. That night, none of them could eat. They went through the motions of routine, but the specter of tomorrow's ruling hung over everything. After Lily was in bed, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch, not touching but close. I can't lose her, Eleanor whispered. I can't survive it, Caleb. I won't. You won't have to. You can't promise that. No, he admitted. But I can promise that if the worst happens, we'll appeal, we'll fight, we'll do whatever it takes. And if the law fails us completely... He stopped. What? Caleb met her eyes in the darkness. Then we run. We take Lily, and we disappear somewhere Richard can't find us. I'm not letting them take her, Eleanor. Not while I'm breathing. Eleanor's breath caught. You'd do that? You'd throw away everything, your home, your life, your freedom, to keep us together? Without hesitation. She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his face. Why? Why are we worth that to you? Because you're my family, and I protect my family. Eleanor's face crumpled, tears spilling over. I don't deserve you. Stop, Caleb said firmly. He took her shoulders, making her look at him. You deserve every good thing this world can give you. You deserve safety and peace and people who fight for you. You deserve to keep your daughter and build a life without fear. And I'm going to make damn sure you get all of that. She kissed him then, sudden and desperate, her hands fisting in his shirt. Caleb froze for a heartbeat before kissing her back, tasting salt from her tears, feeling her trembling against him. It was fierce and messy and born from terror and hope in equal measure. When they broke apart, Eleanor's eyes were wide. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Caleb's voice was rough. Not for that. Not ever. I'm scared, she whispered. Of losing Lily, of losing this, of losing you. I'm scared that I'm finally letting myself believe in something good, and it's going to be ripped away. Then we'll be scared together. And tomorrow, when the judge makes his ruling, we'll face it together. Win or lose, Eleanor, we're in this together. She nodded, and they sat there holding each other until the stars came out. Two broken people choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, broken things could still build something whole. Morning came too fast and too slow at once. Eleanor had barely slept, and when she did, her dreams were filled with courtrooms and judges, and Lily being pulled from her arms while she screamed. She woke gasping more than once, and each time Caleb was there, he'd moved his bedroll outside their door sometime in the night, unwilling to be far away when she needed him. By the time they had to leave for town, Lily had picked up on the tension so completely that she refused to let go of Eleanor's hand. They dressed her in her best dress, the one Eleanor had sewn from fabric Caleb had bought in town, and brushed her hair until it shone. Lily clutched her broken stick with her free hand, her small face set in grim determination. Whatever happens today, Eleanor told her daughter as they prepared to leave, I need you to remember that I love you more than anything in this world. That will never change, no matter what any judge says. We're going to win, Lily said with the absolute certainty of a child who still believed the world was fair. Papa promised we'd stay together forever. Eleanor's eyes met Caleb's over their daughter's head. He looked as exhausted as she felt, his jaw tight with tension, but his eyes were steady. He'd promised, and he intended to keep that promise no matter what it cost. The courtroom was already half full when they arrived. Richard sat at his table looking supremely confident, Pemberton beside him reviewing notes with casual ease. Samuel Cross was there early, his papers spread out, his young face lined with worry that he tried to hide when he saw them. Whatever happens, Cross said quietly as they took their seats, remember that this isn't the end. We can appeal if necessary. We can fight this all the way up the chain. How long would that take? Caleb asked. Months, maybe years. Eleanor's hand found Caleb's beneath the table and gripped hard. Years of uncertainty, of living in fear that any day could be the day they lost Lily. Years of looking over their shoulders, of Richard's shadow looming over everything they tried to build. She didn't know if she could survive that. Judge Aldrich entered and the bailiff called them to order. The judge looked tired, like he'd spent the night wrestling with the decision the same way Eleanor had spent it wrestling with nightmares. He settled into his chair, adjusted his spectacles, and surveyed the room with an expression that revealed nothing. I've given considerable thought to the arguments presented yesterday, he began, his voice carrying easily in the silent room. This is not a simple case, despite Mr. Pemberton's assertions to the contrary. At its heart, we must balance the letter of the law against the spirit of justice, and determine what serves the best interests of the child at the center of this dispute. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Caleb's hand tightened around hers. Mr. Hale presents a compelling argument regarding his financial means and social standing. There is no question that he could provide material advantages to the child, education, connections, opportunities that Mrs. Monroe cannot match. The law has traditionally favored blood relations in matters of guardianship, particularly when those relations demonstrate superior resources. Richard's expression remained neutral, but Eleanor could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he'd won. However, Judge Aldrich continued, and that single word hung in the air like a lifeline, The law also recognizes that a child's welfare encompasses more than material provision. It encompasses emotional security, stability, love, and the preservation of existing bonds when those bonds serve the child's well-being. The judge picked up a document from his desk. I've read the testimony carefully. I've examined the evidence presented, and I've considered the child herself, who sat in this courtroom yesterday with remarkable composure, despite the stress of adult conflicts she should never have been exposed to. He looked directly at Richard. Mr. Hale, you've made clear that you believe your niece deserves better than what her mother has provided. You've cited Mrs. Monroe's poverty, her difficult choices, her marriage to Mr. Monroe as evidence of poor judgment. But what you failed to demonstrate is any genuine relationship with or knowledge of the child you seek to remove from her home. You are, by your own admission, a stranger to Lily. You cannot tell me what comforts her when she's afraid, what makes her laugh, what dreams she has. You see her as a Hale who must be rescued, not as an individual child who has already found security and love. Richard's face hardened, but he said nothing. Judge Aldrich turned to Eleanor and Caleb. Mrs. Monroe, your choices have not always been ideal. Traveling to Phoenix with limited resources was risky, but poverty is not a crime, and taking risks to seek better opportunities is not evidence of unfitness. You were the victim of violence, not the perpetrator of recklessness. And in the aftermath of that violence, you fought to survive for your daughter's sake. That speaks to devotion, not negligence. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Caleb's arm went around her shoulders, supporting her. As for your marriage to Mr. Monroe, the judge continued, Mr. Pemberton has argued it's fraudulent, entered into solely to prevent Mr. Hale from gaining custody. The timing certainly supports that interpretation. However, fraud requires intent to deceive, and I see no evidence of deception here. You've been honest about the circumstances of your marriage. You've acknowledged it began as a practical arrangement, but I've also seen evidence that it has become genuine. The way you and Mr. Monroe support each other, the way Lily relates to Mr. Monroe as her father, the way you've built a functioning household together despite the short duration of your relationship. He set down the document and folded his hands. The adoption troubles me more. It was executed quickly, arguably as part of a legal strategy rather than a natural family evolution. However, the adoption itself was properly filed and executed. Mr. Monroe has demonstrated genuine attachment to the child, and more importantly, the child has demonstrated genuine attachment to him. She calls him Papa. She trusts him. She has bonded with him in a way that suggests real paternal relationship, not legal convenience. Judge Aldrich paused, and in that silence, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. After careful consideration, I find that removing Lily from her current home would cause significant emotional harm. She has stability, love, and parents who are genuinely committed to her well-being. While Mr. Hale could provide material advantages, those advantages do not outweigh the value of the family bonds Lily has already formed. Furthermore, I am not convinced that Mr. Hale's motivations are primarily focused on Lily's individual needs rather than on family legacy and control. Richard half rose from his seat, but Pemberton put a hand on his arm, restraining him. Therefore, Judge Aldrich said, his voice firm, I deny the petition for custody. Lily Monroe will remain with her mother, Eleanor Monroe, and her adoptive father, Caleb Monroe. The adoption is affirmed as valid and binding. Mr. Hale, you are welcome to petition for visitation rights if you wish to develop an actual relationship with your niece, but custody will remain with the Monroes. The gavel came down, and Eleanor's world exploded into light and sound and overwhelming relief. She turned into Caleb's arms, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, feeling his arms lock around her like steel bands, hearing his ragged breathing that suggested he was fighting his own tears. We won, she gasped against his chest. We won. She's ours. She's really ours. I told you, Caleb said, his voice breaking. I told you we'd keep her. Cross was shaking their hands, congratulating them, saying something about the strength of their case and the judge's wisdom, but Eleanor barely heard him. She pulled back from Caleb long enough to look for Lily, finding their daughter running toward them from where the minister's wife had been holding her. Eleanor dropped to her knees and caught Lily in her arms, holding her so tight the little girl squeaked in protest. You're staying with us, baby. Forever. You're staying with us forever. I told you we'd win. Lily said, her small arms wrapping around Eleanor's neck. I told you Papa promised. Caleb knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both of them, and for a moment they were just three people holding on to each other and crying with relief so profound it felt like being reborn. Across the courtroom, Richard was arguing with Pemberton in sharp, angry whispers. Eleanor caught fragments: appeal, incompetent judge, manipulation. But she didn't care. Let him be angry. Let him rail against the injustice of not getting what he wanted. Lily was theirs, legally and completely, and no amount of Richard's fury could change that. As they finally pulled apart and stood, Richard crossed toward them. Caleb immediately stepped in front of Eleanor and Lily, his body a barrier, but Richard stopped a respectful distance away. Up close, he looked older than he had yesterday, the defeat aging him in ways his usual polish couldn't hide. This isn't over, he said, but there was less venom in it than Eleanor expected. I could appeal. You could, Caleb agreed, but you'd lose again, and again. Because Lily's not a possession, she's a person, and she's already chosen where she belongs. Richard's eyes went to Lily, who was peering out from behind Caleb with her broken stick raised like a sword. Something complicated crossed his face. Regret, maybe, or realization of what he'd almost destroyed in his determination to control. She looks like Thomas, he said quietly. When he was young, before everything got complicated. He was brave like that once. Eleanor found her voice. Then honor his memory by letting his daughter be happy, by respecting the family she's chosen instead of trying to force her into one she doesn't know. Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked away. Pemberton followed, already talking about other cases and other battles. Eleanor watched them go and felt the last knot of fear in her chest finally loosen. Is it really over? She asked Caleb. It's really over. They gathered their things and left the courthouse, stepping out into sunshine that felt brighter than it had any right to be. People on the street stared at them. The story of the custody case had spread through town, but Eleanor didn't care. Let them stare. Let them gossip. Her daughter was safe, her family was intact, and nothing else mattered. The ride back to the ranch was the opposite of the tense silence that had marked the morning journey. Lily chattered constantly, asking when they could get a dog, whether she could learn to ride a horse, if Caleb would teach her to fix things like he fixed the fence. Eleanor and Caleb answered her questions with the kind of attention that came from relief and joy and the simple pleasure of being able to plan a future without fear hanging over it. When they reached the ranch, Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and just sat there for a moment, looking at the house and the barn and the land stretching out around them. Home, he said quietly. This is really home now. Eleanor looked at the place that had sheltered them through crisis and uncertainty, that had become the foundation of their unlikely family. It always was, she said, from the moment you brought us here. We just had to fight to keep it. That night, after Lily was finally asleep, still clutching her broken stick but with a smile on her face instead of fear, Eleanor joined Caleb on the porch. They'd been out here every night for weeks now, but tonight felt different. Tonight they weren't planning strategy or processing trauma. Tonight, they were just two people who'd survived something terrible together and come out the other side changed. I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was a dream, Eleanor said, settling into the chair beside him. That we're still waiting for the judge's decision, or that Richard won, and this is just my mind protecting me from reality. It's real, Caleb assured her. We won. She's ours. We're a family. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. When you proposed marriage, I thought it was insane. A desperate plan that might buy us time but couldn't possibly work long term. I thought we'd get through the custody case and then, I don't know, figure out how to extricate ourselves from the arrangement without hurting Lily. And now? Now I can't imagine trying to extricate myself. From you, from this, from what we've built. She turned to look at him. You saved us, Caleb. Not just from Richard, but from hopelessness. You gave me a reason to believe that good things could still happen, that not all men were like Thomas or Richard or the ones who attacked us on the road. You showed Lily what a real father looks like, someone who chooses to stay, who protects without controlling, who loves without conditions. Caleb reached for her hand. You saved me too. I was already dead, Eleanor. I just hadn't stopped breathing yet. Then you and Lily showed up and gave me a reason to actually live instead of just existing. You made this place feel like more than a tomb I was hiding in. So what happens now? Eleanor asked. We've been fighting for so long, first to survive, then to stay together. What do we do when there's nothing to fight against? We live, Caleb said simply. We raise our daughter, we work the ranch, we figure out how to be married to each other for real instead of just for show. We build something that lasts. Eleanor's breath caught. You want this to be real? A real marriage, not just a legal arrangement? It already is real, Eleanor. It became real somewhere between the desert and the courthouse. I love you. The words came out rough but certain. I don't know when it happened exactly, but it did. I love you and Lily both, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure you both know you're cherished. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. I love you too. I fought it because I was terrified, because loving someone means they can hurt you, and I'd been hurt enough. But you kept showing up, kept being patient, kept proving that you meant every promise you made. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid and started hoping, started believing that maybe I could have this. A partner who valued me, a home that felt safe, a future that didn't terrify me. Caleb stood and pulled her to her feet, drawing her close. You can have all of that. You can have everything you want, Eleanor. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure of it. She kissed him then, not desperate like before, but deep and sure. A promise and a claim all at once. Caleb kissed her back with equal certainty, his hands gentle on her face, and Eleanor felt something in her chest open up. All the locked down places, all the defended territory, all the walls she'd built to survive. They crumbled under the weight of this simple truth. She was loved, she was safe, she was home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Eleanor said, I should probably move my things into the main room, or you should move yours into the bedroom. One way or another, I think we should actually share a bed like married people do. Caleb's smile was slow and warm. I think that sounds like a fine idea. They went inside together, moving quietly so as not to wake Lily, and for the first time since they'd met, they shared a bed not out of necessity or strategy, but because they wanted to, because they'd chosen each other, fully and completely, and were ready to build a marriage that was real in every sense. The weeks that followed were the happiest Eleanor could remember. They fell into rhythms that felt natural, working the ranch together, teaching Lily everything from reading to riding, making plans for expanding the vegetable garden, and maybe getting those chickens Lily kept asking about. Eleanor discovered she had a talent for mending and sewing, and began taking in work from town, bringing in a little extra money, and giving her a sense of contribution that eased some of her fears about being a burden. Caleb blossomed in ways Eleanor hadn't expected. The solitary, haunted man who'd found them in the desert transformed into someone who smiled easily, who sang while he worked, who played elaborate games with Lily that involved her stick becoming a magic wand or a knight's sword depending on the story. He was patient with Eleanor's occasional nightmares, her moments of panic when a stranger came to the ranch, her need for reassurance that this was permanent and real. And slowly, carefully, Eleanor learned to trust that permanence, to believe in the reality of what they'd built. One evening, about 2 months after the court case, Eleanor was preparing dinner when she heard Lily shriek with laughter from outside. She went to the door to find Caleb teaching their daughter to lasso fence posts, the rope tangling and missing more often than not, but Lily's determination undimmed. Like this, Papa? Lily asked, swinging the rope with enthusiasm, if not accuracy. Almost. Keep your wrist loose, and there! You almost had it that time. Eleanor stood watching them, her heart so full it ached. This man who'd thought himself too damaged for family had become the best father Lily could have asked for. And this child, who'd seen too much darkness too young, was laughing and playing and healing in an environment where she was safe to be a child. Caleb caught her watching and smiled, the kind of smile that transformed his whole face. Care to join us, Mrs. Monroe? I think I will, Mr. Monroe. She stepped off the porch and into the yard, into the warm evening light, into the life they were building together from the wreckage of what had come before. Lily immediately insisted Eleanor try the lasso too, and they spent the next hour laughing and missing and celebrating the rare successful catches, the three of them together in the simple joy of being a family. Later that night, after Lily was asleep and they were lying in bed together, Caleb said quietly, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About maybe building an addition to the house. Give Lily her own room as she gets older. Maybe add a proper study where you could do your sewing work. Make this place feel more like it's built for all of us, instead of just for me." Eleanor propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at him in the darkness. "You'd do that? Rebuild the house for us?" "It's not just your house anymore, Eleanor. It's our house. And I want it to reflect that. Want it to be a place where Lily can grow up and someday bring her own children to visit. Want it to be something we built together." "Our children," Eleanor said softly. "Not just Lily. Someday, maybe, if we're blessed, we could give her brothers or sisters." Caleb's hand found hers. "You'd want that? More children?" "I'd want that. A family we built intentionally, not from crisis, but from choice. Children who grow up knowing they were wanted and loved from the start." She paused. "Would you want that?" "I'd want everything with you," Caleb said simply. "Whatever future we can build, I want it." They lay together in comfortable silence, planning and dreaming, two people who'd survived their own private hells finding peace in each other's arms. The seasons changed, and with them came the small milestones that marked a life being lived rather than merely endured. Lily's 5th birthday, celebrated with a cake Eleanor made and presents Caleb crafted, a wooden horse he'd carved, and a new dress sewn from fabric printed with flowers. The first successful harvest from their expanded garden. The day Lily read her first complete sentence from the primer Caleb had ordered from town. The night Eleanor told Caleb she was pregnant, and his whoop of joy woke Lily, who insisted on celebrating even though she didn't fully understand what was being celebrated. Through it all, the shadow of Richard Hale faded. He never did petition for visitation, apparently deciding that the battle wasn't worth continuing. Occasionally, Eleanor would hear news of him from town, business ventures, social engagements, the respectable life he continued in Santa Fe. She no longer felt fear when his name came up, only a distant pity for a man who'd valued control over connection and lost the chance to know a remarkable child. When Eleanor's belly began to swell with new life, Lily was fascinated and protective in equal measure. She would talk to the baby through Eleanor's skin, telling elaborate stories about the ranch and the horses, and her papa who could fix anything. Caleb would watch these moments with such tenderness that Eleanor sometimes cried just from the overwhelming emotion of it all. "Are you happy?" he asked her one evening, his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. Eleanor looked around their home, expanded now with the addition Caleb had built, filled with Lily's drawings and Eleanor's sewing projects and Caleb's books and all the accumulated debris of a family actively living. She looked at Lily asleep in her new bedroom, at the man beside her who'd become her partner in every sense, at the life they'd constructed from nothing but stubborn hope and fierce determination. "I'm happy," she said, and meant it completely. "For the first time in my life, I'm genuinely, impossibly happy." The baby, a boy they named Thomas Caleb Monroe, honoring the past while claiming the future, was born on a cool autumn evening with Lily pacing anxiously outside and Caleb holding Eleanor's hand through every contraction. When the midwife finally placed the squirming, crying bundle in Eleanor's arms, Caleb leaned down to kiss her forehead and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, for building this with me, for giving me a family." "Thank you for finding us," Eleanor whispered back, "for hearing Lily crying in the desert and choosing to care what happened to us, for being the man you promised to be." Lily was allowed in shortly after, climbing carefully onto the bed to inspect her new brother with the gravity of someone being given an enormous responsibility. "I'll protect him," she announced, still holding her broken stick, now polished and decorated but never discarded. "Just like I protected Mama. Nobody's going to hurt him ever." "That's right," Caleb said, gathering all three of them into his arms. His wife, his daughter, his son, his family. "We protect each other. That's what families do." And there, in that small ranch house in the Arizona desert, with the stars bright overhead and the future stretching out before them full of possibility, they were complete. Not perfect. They had arguments and struggles, and days when old wounds ached. But they were whole in the ways that mattered, bound together by choice and tested by fire, and stronger for having survived it all. Eleanor had stopped running. Caleb had stopped hiding. Lily had stopped being afraid. And together they built something that neither money, nor blood, nor circumstance could tear apart. A family born not from obligation but from love, not from tradition but from conscious choice, not from fairy tales but from the hard, honest work of people who decided that broken things could still make beautiful homes. Years later, when Lily was grown with children of her own, she would tell them the story of how her family came to be. She'd tell them about the desert and the stick and the brave mother who refused to surrender. She'd tell them about the father who heard a cry in the wilderness and chose to answer it. She'd tell them about the ranch that became a refuge, about the court case that almost tore them apart, about the love that held them together through it all. And she'd tell them that family wasn't about who you were born to, but about who chose you and kept choosing you, every single day, through every challenge and celebration. That home wasn't a place, but the people who made you feel safe enough to be yourself. That sometimes the best things in life came from the worst circumstances, if you were brave enough to fight for them and patient enough to let them grow. But all of that was still to come. For now, in this perfect moment, they were simply 3 hearts, soon to be 4, beating in time, choosing each other, choosing hope, choosing to believe that the cry in the desert had led them exactly where they were always meant to be. Home.